Can you say one more time, just like that, in 1965, you juggle, you know, just maybe put into a sound bite about, you know, you started at Hubert's in 1965 as a juggler, and were there 5 shows a day, or how many, you worked from, what, noon to closing, or?
Yeah, when I worked in Hubert's Museum in 1965, which was the year it closed. It was in the summer. I don't know how many weeks I worked, but it was all day. I mean, if it opened at 1 and it closed at 7, you were doing continuous shows. And I think it was really continuous. If you wanted to eat, you performed, went out and ate, and came back, because you couldn't do anything else. There was no break per se in the show. It was, the only thing like a break was when the dancing girls performed, but then the next show started right after that.
And it closed at night? It wasn't open at night, or?
I don't remember. It didn't go real late, but it seems to me it opened in the afternoon around 1 or 2, and then it went to maybe 6 or 7.
Were there any other questions, Adam? Anything you want to ask?
Yeah, if you can answer to Jeff. Who was Hubert?
We don't know. Nobody knows who Hubert was. He's not the one that closed it. He's not, as far as we can tell, the one that opened it. The only thing we know is that I mean, maybe someone knows something I don't know, but it's a wonderful question. But there was a dime museum in Coney Island called Huber's, without the T. It was also on 14th Street, without the T. So it looks like a kind of attempt to cash in on the reputation of Huber's Museum, to change it to Hubert's, so it's different, and then to sort of cash in on that by changing the name slightly. That happens once in a while. So I don't even know if there was a Hubert that was involved with this museum. I personally doubt it.
And you were talking about coming into New York with your father. Can you tell me a little bit about what your feelings were like when you, where were you living at the time?
My parents were living in Greenwich, Connecticut, so it was a fairly easy commute into New York City at that time.
And what was it like? What were your feelings like when you found out you were going in, or at least initially when you get?
I love it. You know, there's a thing that when I was little, when I was like 5, my mother would take me to the circus, and she would not tell me she was taking me to the circus. And when I grew up, I said, how come you never told me when we were going to the circus? And I would like really get nuts, because you never told me you were taking me to the doctor either. So when you would dress me up to take me somewhere and not tell me where I was going, I knew I was either going to the doctor or the circus. And the minute I would see the circus tent or something, I would get all excited. And she said, well, I had to stop telling you I was taking you to the circus because you get so excited you lose your lunch. So that's her claim to this day, is that she couldn't tell me she was taking me to the circus. So the excitement would hit when I saw some clue that I was going to the circus and not the doctor's office. Because she said if she told me she was taking me to the doctor, she probably would have gotten some resistance. So I had this sort of, I remember one time visiting a doctor very recently and having an examination that sort of made it difficult to sit, and going to the circus that night and sitting in the bleachers and saying, yeah, this is, my mother would have loved this. I went to the doctor today, and now I went to the circus, all in one day.
Who taught you juggling?
Well, my father knew how, so he showed me how to juggle. But he didn't teach me. There's a difference between showing someone how to juggle and teaching them. I teach juggling. He showed me how. And it took me all day to learn it. And that was in 1954. And that, within 2 years of that, in 1956, I got serious about this whole juggling and circus. And as time went on, I looked back fondly on the sideshow and all the things that I didn't care for as much when I was learning the skills.
What were some of the things that drove you as a performer? I mean, how did you know this is what you wanted to do, or you wanted to make a living doing this type of thing?
Well, when I was 16 and I realized that I wanted to do something, and that my parents wanted me to go to college, and I hated school, I just, I saw a juggler traveling with the Harlem Magicians, which was an offshoot of the Harlem Globetrotters. He was a halftime entertainer. I thought, this is great, you know, he's got 3 clubs, 5 balls, 3 cigar boxes, and he travels all over the world. And you know, he can go out and do a 10-minute act, and that's all he needs to know how to do. I aspired to that and wanted to do that. He, by the way, this name is Mike Pickering. He was also an excellent trampolinist, although I never saw him on the trampoline. I had him look at my 5-ball bounce, and he said, "You're bouncing them the wrong direction, and there's a guy in Germany who does 7. Well, I learned to do 7 the wrong direction, and that's what that postcard of me is all about. I have to give you a postcard now, definitely, in case you need it.
There seems to be like a camaraderie or a romance about like carnies and people who do the sideshow, and can you talk about that a little?
Well, I know more about the clannishness, really, of circus people, because I am one, and at the same time, I'm an outsider to some degree. I tried to be like, when I was young, I tried to be like Catherine Dunham and be an anthropologist and like join the circus, do the circus, but try to learn about the circus. And I suppose I still do that. But the people at NYU think of me as a circus person. The people at Cirkus think of me as an NYU person. So I'm sort of a little bit an outsider in both worlds. But then there's the carny world is a whole other thing. And they're very tight, I think. Although where the connection between carnival people and circus people begins and ends with the sideshow, the circus sideshow, because they both have the circus sideshow. Carnival people make much more money. I mean, they're basically, I don't want to say, well, they're carnies. Let's leave it at that. They're carnies, but they make more money. I remember thinking of the similarity between circus and carnival and helping tear down a carnival once, putting all the penny arcades in the truck. And I was amazed because pennies were falling out of the machines, and they didn't care. And they paid me 5 or 6 times as much as a circus would ever have paid me, just for loading trucks. And I realized then that I had to love the circus a lot to not go into the carny business. But yeah, the wonder, what do you call it, the Wanderlust, you know, the travel, I kind of like that. I still do. Although I like having roots in New York City.
Describe what it's like again to juggle battle axes. I mean, that sounds pretty dangerous.
Well, they weren't particularly sharp, but they were heavy and cumbersome, hard to juggle because the weight was all out in the end. And each one of them did have 4 points, which would be very painful if you impaled yourself with those. The blades were not particularly sharp, but they were heavy and ill-balanced. I have one on display at the Bindlestiff Museum of Times Square right now. It's an actual battle axe from that I used at Hubert's. And the problem with them is because they're flat, you know what I mean? So that the blade, when you juggle them, you try to keep the blade horizontal and vertical, not horizontal, vertical. You try to keep the blade vertical because if that blade goes to the diagonal or horizontal, it makes it really almost impossible to juggle them. Club, you don't have to worry about it. Club, you just turn over, and if it spins a little bit, it doesn't matter. The battle axe, you really want it not to spin, and that's what makes it difficult. And the whole thing with my act really was to try to make something like a sideshow at Hubert's Museum. I would juggle the 3 battle axes and throw one up with a double and clang the other 2 together to show that they were real metal. I would clang them together and then go back into the juggle and throw one up in a double and clang them together. And that was to my mind, the sideshow aspect of my act. But I think Wolf was glad to have, you know, a relatively young then performer, and eager as I was. And the pay was probably some kind of scale. You know, it was not much. But I was very pleased to have the job. I had considered working there a couple of years before, and my mother and some other people had talked me out of it. And then, I said, well, you know, a few years later, I said, well, whose life is it anyway? And I went ahead and did it. And I'm really glad I did, because I worked that summer, took off a little time, and was going to go back in the fall when it was closed by Max, somebody who owned it, actually owned it.
good. I think is that
I
good?
have one question, one more.
Oh, yeah, one more,
All right,
okay,
so
put one more tape in?
Okay.
Yeah, we got out of tape.